My name is Kathy Cotney. I'm co-founder of Triangle Area GIS, and I'm on the programming committee. And I'd like to introduce our first distinguished speaker, David Biasi.
Well done, Kathy.
Thank you. David's got a really interesting story to tell us about ethics in GIS. And I think this is one of the more important topics, especially today as we are courting potentially becoming licensed professionals in our particular field. And lots of other discussions are going on where I think making ethical decisions is really important. David works for ESRI, and he is a Education
outreach.
Education outreach. And he's also one of the Direction Magazine's Distinguished Speakers series, which is where I found him. So let's welcome David.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you. Kathy invited me to come, and I'm delighted to be here, honored to be here, and really excited that so many of you thought this session was worthwhile. I guarantee you the next two speakers will be, and I'll do my best to make it worth your while too. I want to talk to you about a project that I did with my university educator hat on. I've been teaching at Penn State University since 1989. Now I do it all online in my part-time, in my spare time while when I'm off the job at Esri. We had a really interesting opportunity to do a project funded by the National Science Foundation called Ethics Education for GIS Pros. Now, there's been talk about ethics in GIS since the beginning, and it makes sense, doesn't it? How many times have you heard somebody say GIS is a powerful technology? Well, if it's a powerful technology, then there's an opportunity to abuse that power, right? And therefore, it's a field that is rife with ethical issues. And for a long time, and it's really part of the broader movement of the professionalization of GIS that you'll hear in a track that I think continues in this room. Rebecca's going to speak to this issue. It's really been part of a trend of the professionalization of GIS, which was of great concern to me as an educator, because I wanted to make sure that my graduates had an opportunity to actually be professionals, right? And ethics is a big part of that. So I got together with folks at Oregon State University. Some of you may know Dawn Wright, who's now the chief scientist at Esri, and a colleague named Francis Harvey at the University of Minnesota. We teamed up with the Association of American Geographers, and we were really excited to write this grant proposal to the NSF that we were going to help develop a curriculum around ethics education for GIS pros. We're really proud of this. Did all of the literature review and all the stuff that you have to do to get a proposal turned in. We turned it in, and they turned it right back to us. Rejected. And why? They said, well, this is a great idea, and you guys know something about GIS and education, but you don't know anything about ethics. And so the NSF very wisely said, why don't you go and meet some ethicists, and ethics is a branch of philosophy. Go meet some philosophers and social psychologists who are pros at this stuff, and you can teach them about GIS, and they'll teach you about ethics, and then maybe you'll have a proposal. So that's what we did. And so who knew that there was an Association for Professional and Practical Ethics? There's a whole professional society of people who are ethicists in a variety of fields. So I went to their conference and learned from them, and met up with a few, figured out who were the real movers and shakers, and I went and talked and said, how'd you like to be on this project with us? And so they said, yeah, that sounds, I don't know what GIS is, but that sounds like fun. So we all got together, and the Association of American Geographers hosted a meeting where we sat down for 2 days at the Cosmos Club in Washington, D.C., and we talked about GIS and the problems that we thought were germane, and they talked about how ethicists would handle that. And one of the things we learned, for example, is the way people learn ethics as a branch of philosophy is a similar way that people learn law, and that's through the case method. Have you heard of the case method? So the case method is really interesting. This was all new to us, the GIS people. The case method is where you get a realistic scenario that presents a problem that's non-trivial. That is, the answer isn't obvious. And then you learn how to reason. You learn how to reason your way through that problem and come up with a bunch of options and evaluate them in a rational way and come up with a smart solution. And so that was all new to us, this idea that the case method would be the key approach. So they set us off on a track, and we proposed to NSF this new approach, and NSF said, great, do it. And they funded our study. So then what we did was to create, in the end, what we did was create this collection of case studies. Here they are here. So there's a collection of case studies that you can find at gisprofessionalethics.org. And here's an example of one of those cases. And in fact, my colleagues here are going to help me by passing around copies of this one, in case if you guys are still into it. Bless your heart, thank you for helping me. And while they're passing these cases, this is one of the 16 or so cases that we built for this project. And while they're handing it out, thank you so much for your help. While they're handing it out, I want to play you a National Public Radio story on which this particular case is based. So let's see if the audio works.
Support for NPR comes from Audible, presenting Trevor Noah's debut audiobook, Born a Crime, Stories from a South African Childhood. Hit Hear More now to listen to an excerpt from Noah's story of coming of age during the end of apartheid-era South Africa.
All right, here goes the case.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Michelle Norris.
And I'm Robert Siegel. In Los Angeles, the police face criticism from the American Civil Liberties Union and some American Islamic groups over a plan to map Muslim enclaves in the area. It's a project undertaken by the LAPD's Anti-Terrorism Bureau. Deputy Police Chief Michael Downing is in charge of that. He's testified about the community mapping plan before the U.S. Senate Committee on Homeland Security, and he joins us now. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
And first, what would a completed map of the Los Angeles Muslim community actually show?
Well, that's what we don't know. That's why we would like to engage in this process. And I think that the word mapping is maybe causing some concern. It's really...
The word mapping has been causing some concern because it almost sounds a little bit like geographic profiling, maybe? Interesting discussion all of a sudden. My hair stood on end the first time I heard this story.
Plan to help us identify the 500 to 700,000 Muslims throughout this region, and especially the communities that are isolated and removed from the greater society. We just don't know, what the trust level is, what the apprehension to engage with law enforcement is. And we've been in this outreach effort with the Muslim communities for the past 18 months, and this is the next evolution of community outreach.
You told the Senate committee that your hope is that with the mapping program you might, and I quote, identify communities within the larger Muslim community which may be susceptible to violent, ideologically based extremism.
That's correct.
Is it really appropriate for the police to be looking for people who may be susceptible to something that could turn illegal as opposed to people who are actually doing something illegal?
Well, our functional objective in law enforcement is to prevent crime and to prevent crimes from occurring. Now, after these, we identify the communities, not individuals. It's not profiling. It's just understanding where they are, where they exist, and how they express themselves. Then we can apply a set of risk factors, as I said in my testimony, such as exposure to a more radical Wahhabi Salafi preaching, socioeconomic conditions, age, gender demographics, unemployment, education, and so on, to try to identify these and see if those communities are really susceptible to a trajectory of radicalization.
So, did you catch all of the factors that they were considering? This is a classic GIS analysis, right? Classic GIS analysis. So I put it to you that this real event constitutes, if you put it together right, a non-trivial ethics case study. So the case that you have, and I apologize, I didn't expect so many people to show up, but the case says, okay, so the LAPD has this project, and let's say they come to a university GIS research center, right, that does sponsored research related to GIS and does some community work. And they come with an RFP and say, we'd like your proposal to do a GIS analysis to map Muslim neighborhoods using all of these socioeconomic and other factors to help us map Muslim neighborhoods. So from the perspective of, if you're, let's say you're the director of this research center at the university. So this is a non-trivial case because it should be, if you have any open mind at all, it's not really obvious what the right thing to do is, right? This is a well-intentioned effort to protect public safety at one level, right? On another level, what is a university about? And what is, if you went to a university's mission statement, what would that say about the university values and appreciation for diversity and concern about things like public profiling, or about geographic profiling? My point is simply is that the essence of a good case in ethics is one where the right answer is not obvious. So it's not a trivial ethics problem. It's a substantial ethics problem that really requires reasoning, and this is one of the things we learned from our ethicist friends. So, for non-trivial, for more trivial or more routine ethical problems, there's a code of GIS ethics. Are some of you familiar with the GIS code of ethics? You can find it easily by searching GIS code of ethics, and the GIS Certification Institute has endorsed this code of ethics that was produced by largely by a fellow named Will Craig, but with input from lots of people. It must be 20 years now that they developed the code of ethics. But this is a very carefully and thoughtfully developed document that lays out what GIS professionals' obligations are to society, to employers and funders, to colleagues in the profession, and to individuals in society. So a routine ethics problem is one that can be reduced to simple rule following. That is, oops, I don't feel quite good about this choice. Let me look it up in the Code of Ethics and it'll tell me the right thing to do. Alternatively, GISCI, the GIS Certification Institute, also developed a set of rules of conduct. So the Code of Ethics you can think of as what you ought to do as a GIS professional, and the rules of conduct are the flip side of what you ought not to do, right? So there's a whole list of what we should do, we shall not, we shall not, we shall not. There's a very interesting one here right at the top that it's been curious to me because I had a little hand in this along with several other people. I know you can't read it, I'll read it for you. GIS products and services should benefit society and enhance the well-being of individuals and groups within the constraints of existing law. Some applications and services may harm individuals directly or indirectly while advancing government policies that some citizens regard as morally questionable. GIS professionals' participation in such applications is a matter of individual conscience. Well, this is really relevant to GIS pros who are working in geospatial intelligence, right? Who might be charged with creating a collateral damage analysis for, let's say, a drone strike on an alleged terrorist leader. So in that case, they're saying this is not the problem here. It can't be solved by rule following. You've actually got to think it through, right? And so the essence of getting beyond that code of ethics to a case study analysis is, what do you do if the answer is not clear cut? What do you do if it's not a simple dilemma of right versus wrong? What if it's in the gray area there? And it turns out that what you do is exercise rationality and exercise creativity. So a concept I never thought about before working with these ethicists, that they talked about ethical creativity. Now that's not like moral relativism. Ethical creativity means is, okay, so in the case I mentioned for the lab director, you could respond to the RFP or refuse to respond to the RFP, right? That's not very creative. What are the things in between there that you could do? For example, could you meet with the folks that offered the RFP, get more information, and suggest a modification to the RFP that would better align the project with the university's mission statement? That's just one example. What I'm going to present here to you now is what is recommended by the ethicists we work with, specifically a guy named Michael Davis, who works at the Illinois Institute of Technology. His full-time job is working out the ethics of professions, specifically engineering and secondarily the law. And he was the major consultant for us. And he has this guide to deal with non-trivial ethics problems like the one I presented. And when I teach ethics at Penn State, all students there, master's students, are required to go through an ethics training. We go through case studies like that, and we go through the discipline of approaching the problem like this. First of all, state the problem clearly. Now, what is it about this case that makes you uneasy? You can often tell an ethical problem by just not feeling good about a choice you have to make. Then you gather and assess the relevant facts in the case. And so I won't go through reading the details of this, given limitations in time. This is something you can easily find online. A third step is identifying stakeholders. So who are the stakeholders in this particular case? In the case about the LAPD, it's the LAPD. It would be an ethics officer at the university, right? It might be if the director of the lab is reporting to somebody above him or her, that person would be a stakeholder. And if you were really concerned about ethics, your employees would be consulted as well, because they would be complicit in any decision that you made if you put them to work on a project like that. So identifying stakeholders, talking to them, which is always the best advice in an ethics problem, is talk to people who are stakeholders. And then, number 4, develop a list of at least 5 options. 5 options is extreme, but it's extremely important to suspend judgment about a choice like this until you thought of alternative things, some of which might not be obvious, some of which take some brain power and creativity. That's where that ethical creativity comes in. And once you've identified an entire list of options, of plausible options, then you test them. And so Michael Davis suggests this whole list of tests. Does the option do less harm than any alternative? Would I want my choice of this option published in the newspaper? Could I defend my choice of this option before a congressional committee? A professional test. What might my profession's ethics committee or the code of ethics, how would they regard this choice? So this is, you can see this is a very disciplined exercise of, first of all, suspending judgment until you've made those, laid out those options, testing each option, and then, after you've tested them, decide which one stands up best to the test. And it's likely that that's going to be the best solution for an ethics problem. And then typically, once you make a choice, you've also learned from that. You learn from that exercise, and that may actually affect your own organization's ethics codes, right? And it might affect how your organization is actually organized. That is the story that I wanted to tell you. The points that I wanted to make there is that there's a difference between a trivial ethics problem, one in which right and wrong is more or less obvious, but the ones that are really meaningful are the ones where, geez, I can really see some reasoning. I can see why they might want to have that map of Muslim neighborhoods, but geez, I'm not sure I feel good about that. Or, man, I could just be a lucrative contract, but I don't know. How would my colleagues think of the work I'm doing? And how would it affect the reputation of the university? And is it really geographic profiling? Or, so when you get into a quandary like that, it's not a dilemma, it's a quandary. And at that point, there is a method. There's a method you can use, and that method is called reasoning. And the alternative to reasoning is called opinionating. And opinionating is when somebody looks at an issue like that, they immediately make a decision, and then they seek to justify it. Opinionating is a lot of what you see on the news, right? People have a immediate reaction, instinctual reaction, and then they justify it through argument. That's not reasoning. Reasoning is that. It's suspending judgment until you have identified and considered alternatives, and then make a rational decision about what the right alternative is. This is something I'm really proud of in graduate education at Penn State, that every student has to go through this. And you can imagine if you were required to go through ethics, you might resent it a little bit, because what's the implication? That you're not ethical? But in fact, almost everybody that comes through this finds it to be an eye-opening and an enriching experience to know that there's a way to do this that's smart. There's a way to do this that's rational. And I hope it was at least entertaining to you. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. Kathy, did I get it? All right, so any comments or questions are welcome. Yeah, so the question is, have I actually encountered organizations that are concerned with location-based data or like drone imagery? Yeah, so one of the things that we do in this class is, before getting to this case analysis approach, is just to ask students to say, what do you think is the most substantial ethical issue confronting GIS? Or what's the most substantial ethical issue that you yourself have confronted in the workplace? And far and away, the thing that worries most people is privacy. And privacy is, it turns out to be, I mean, there are legal issues in privacy, but there's ethical ones too. And it's a great example of a non-trivial ethics problem, because lots of people like, for example, they like having enough known, we like having enough known about us that when we make a web search, we get back results that are relevant to us. And we have to surrender a little bit of privacy in order to get that. But when people think about drones flying over their backyard and taking pictures of their kids, they have a different feeling. So that's a really interesting, non-trivial example. Hi there. Oh, yeah. Oh, very good answer. Yeah. Sorry that I ran out of paper. Yeah, the American Civil Liberties Union took the LAPD to court, and the LAPD abandoned the plan. I don't think it was ever litigated in court. It was just the threat of a lawsuit. And so for their own test, that test, the publicity test, didn't stand up. They actually got a good response when he presented to Congress, presented the plan, and Congress was receptive to that plan. But when it got on NPR, and then when the ACLU got a hold of it, they said, you know what, this isn't worth it. So it never did come to that stage of an RFP going out. That was my little fiction added to make it interesting. Thank you for that question. Really good one. Hey. Yeah, I get. So this is openly available, and you guys, you want to set up your computer for the next talk while I'm talking here? You can go ahead and hook it in. So yeah, there are people downloading this stuff all the time, and I get questions like every couple of weeks. I'll get a question from somebody wanting to know exactly the kind of question that you just asked him. Is, well, what's the backstory about this? And I do have a set of what I call educator resources that say, like, okay, well, what questions should you raise in a discussion, and what actually happened at the end? And so people have to contact me to get those educator resources. And yeah, I can't give you a number of how many people are teaching these, but not many people have a freestanding ethics workshop or course, but lots of people like to inject these things into their curriculum, because it's just interesting, isn't it? It's interesting that if you were in a field that didn't have ethical problems, you'd worry about whether it was really significant. All right? We'd worry about if it was, in fact, powerful. Hey.
Real quick, so I understand the concept of targeting that specific, and that's why it's lawsuit, but we do simply select and make that service on the government level. What if they were to what if they were to stop that all of the they weren't specifically identifying one, and they broadened it? You think in your opinion they could over that hurdle of
Yeah, is it Bill? Am I reading your tag? Thank you for the question, Bill. The question was, would it be possible to reframe that mapping project in a way that was more inclusive and therefore less obviously an attempt at profiling? And what you just did was to think of one of those creative alternatives. That's what you could take back and say, let's talk about this RFP. I got a problem with it the way it's written, but how about if we did more of an ethnicity atlas of the city of Los Angeles? Is that something we could talk about? You could probably charge a lot more for that too. So that's a really good option. Thanks again, you all. It was a real pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for the great questions.